From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Today, we're talking about education deserts. That's a term some lawmakers in Denver are using to sound the alarm around underperforming schools. The math goes something like this. If you live in a zip code where at least 2/3 of the students attend a school with subpar math and reading scores, you live in an education desert. One estimate says about 123,000 public school students in Colorado fall into this category. So-called education deserts are found all over the state, and they're more likely to impact students of color and low-income students. Some Democratic lawmakers recently proposed an unprecedented solution. Colorado Senate President James Coleman and Governor Jared Polis want to make it easier for charter schools to open in education deserts. They see charter schools' flexibility and tailored teaching methods as part of the plan to boost academic success. And this is the unprecedented part. Coleman wants to introduce a bill that would let those charter schools bypass local school boards, which traditionally can endorse or torpedo a new charter school. Erica Brunlin covers education for the Colorado Sun. She joined me to talk about Coleman's proposal and the seismic impact it could have on Colorado's public school system.
Charter schools are, of course, public schools. They receive taxpayer dollars, but public school proponents are quick to point out that they can pull students away from the traditional public school system, which then they say further drains an already underfunded system. And so this stands to have some pretty major impacts on how we fund schools and the ability of charter schools to open more easily in communities across the state.
And why are charter schools seen as a potential solution or part of a solution to these education deserts?
So charter schools are really interesting in that they do receive taxpayer funds, but they're also granted more flexibilities and more opportunities to be innovative than your traditional public schools. And so charter school proponents like Senate President Coleman, like Governor Jared Polis, who has helped found charter schools, they look to charter schools as places that have more bandwidth to test out new approaches to education, to really rise above some of the rigid rules that public traditional schools have to abide by when it comes to curriculum, when it comes to kinds of lessons approached in schools, when it comes to the teachers who are in those classrooms.
Well, allowing new charter schools to open without the endorsement of the local school board is, as you mentioned, a pretty big idea. How different would the process be under this proposal?
There's a lot of power within a local school board to decide whether they want to open a charter school. I think Senate President Coleman's proposal just introduces a total curveball in this whole process because it would basically open up a sidestep for these charter school operators to open in communities with underperforming schools. The big component that Senate President Coleman hinges on here is that these charter schools that could open in areas would have to be meeting community demand. There would have to be demonstrated demand from community members, families, and teachers for these schools to open in these pockets of Colorado.
Charter schools are, as we've been talking about, already controversial. Opponents say they can pull away funds from schools that need the money. They also may draw more affluent students away from traditional public schools. How would this proposal address those concerns or exacerbate them?
So I think Senate President Coleman recognizes the tension within school choice that we have now seen for decades, but he is more focused on how do we make sure that the 123,000 Colorado students who are deprived of, quote, access to quality schools have other options that can meet their needs. He also really doubled down on a focus of bringing educators into these conversations to also make sure that they can weigh in on the kinds of programs and schools that their students need. He said that educators are often left out of these conversations, and so he wants to bring them in so that he is getting more on the ground perspective. So at the end of the day, Erin, his main focus is how do we open up more high quality options for kids who maybe for generations have not had access to a quality school within their local community.
Charter schools, by definition, have operated differently from most schools in a district, but they have the blessing of their local school board. If this proposal were to come to pass, how big a break in precedent would this be?
Colorado already has a pretty healthy school choice landscape. We allow charter schools. We allow other innovative schools like magnet schools, innovation schools. We have all of these different options for schools along the choice spectrum. But this would be a big deal because while charter schools have a lot more flexibilities than your traditional public school, they also do have guardrails around them, which are largely put in place by local school boards who say yes or no to these schools. Of course, they would be authorized by the Charter School Institute. So there is a level of regulation there. Certainly, these schools aren't just going to willy-nilly be allowed to open with anyone running them, but it does give them more flexibility and more of a gateway to open in places across Colorado.
Governor Jared Polis has expressed some support for this idea. How important is backing from the governor?
I think backing from the governor is huge. I don't think it's everything, but I do think it's huge, and it's a big signal of where the governor wants to take education in the state. We heard from Governor Polis as far back as January during his State of the State address an endorsement of this kind of policy. He called out Senate President Coleman in his focus on addressing these education deserts and helping policymakers find more ways to open up more kinds of schools within school choice across the state. So we're hearing very loudly and clearly from the governor that he wants a policy along what's being proposed by Senate President Coleman to be able to move forward. He said we have to have the moral courage to make some changes so that students in these zip codes no longer are confined to underperforming schools.
What do public school advocates that you've interviewed see as the potential downside of this?
I think there are a lot of issues that this is raising for traditional public school advocates. I talked to the president of the Colorado Education Association, Kevin Vick, who really worries that this proposal could set the stage for a voucher program. He also pointed out that state standardized tests, which are the main mechanism we're using to judge these schools in these 46 zip codes, those test measures are not a perfect gauge of how well schools are performing. They're only one data point in the broader picture of how much quality schools can give their kids. So traditional public school proponents are saying, let's first look at all the factors that are going into measuring school quality before we allow charter schools to open in communities without the green light from school boards.
Erica Brunling covers education for the Colorado Sun. We'll include a link to her story in the show notes and at KUNC.org. By the way, Erica noted that this could be a tricky year to pass any kind of school choice legislation because of the $1.2 billion budget shortfall that state lawmakers have to address. She said Senate President Coleman told her that if he doesn't propose a bill this year, he intends to bring back the idea next session. That's it today for In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.